Picture, if you will, a little sod. Everyone knows one, some of you might even have one. Hell, I bet a couple of you are right little sods yourselves. Now imagine that you are the parent of said little sod, and he's playing up. He's been noisy in the supermarket. He's thrown his toy on the floor. He ate straight from the pick and mix display, and now you have to pay for sweets you didn't even let him have. Oh great, now he's full of sugar too. That little sod has, say, 2 siblings, and they're starting to pick up on his behaviour. Oh no, you say to yourself, one of them is bad enough. Sometimes, though you will deny this to everyone, you question why you had him in the first place. You'll be damned if his siblings become little sods too. So what do? You punish the lot of them, right? That makes sense. By punishing the innocent children, you ensure that they will become the enforcers of your rules.
Kayleigh Marie Edwards has been entertaining and chilling audiences with her own eclectic mix of horror and comedy. Now, for the first time, this popular author has collected her works together, reviewing and revising each one to bring you the definitive versions of her unique tales. From murderous children to nightmarish trips to an ill-fated zombie apocalypse, corpsing will send you running for the light switch, but smiling as you do it. Corpsing was written by Kayleigh Marie Edwards and published by the Sinister Horror Company in 2017. In this episode of Sinister Reread, Justin Park chats with Kayleigh about the publisher's most dual-natured short story collection. Hi, this is Justin from the Sinister Horror Company, and I'm here today with Kayleigh Marie Edwards, the author behind the short story collection Corpsing, a collection of horror and horror comedy stories. Hi, Kayleigh.
Hello.
We're here today to talk about your short story collection Corpsing, which was your debut collection.
Yes.
So the first thing I want to do, normally when I talk about these, I talk about I'm talking about like a long fiction, like a novel or novella with one piece. So it's kind of interesting to actually sit down and talk to an author about a short story collection, because there's a lot more assortment of themes and ideas and styles which kind of run on within a short story collection. When you think about the stories within Corpsing and just your writing in general, where do you get your inspirations from?
Do you know, I don't know, because sometimes I'll get an idea when I'm reading something else, and then something will just come to me. Like that happens quite often, but it's never anything to do in any way, shape, or form with the thing I'm actually reading. It'll be something entirely different. So I could be reading, I don't know, like a vampire story, and then I'll get some idea about, you know, a chicken soup flood. So I'm really not sure why that happens, other than I guess I'm relaxed, but my brain is sort of thinking creatively because I'm reading. I don't know if that makes any sense at all. I'm not really inspired by real life often in terms of plot, but people inspire me because for some reason, I'm usually surrounded by, I don't know how to put this, different types of people.
What you mean, like, unusual characters?
Yes, thank you. That's it. That's what I meant. Unusual characters, or I find myself in very strange situations. My mum thinks I'm a magnet for all things weird and weird people and happenings. So I think I'm more of a character-based writer than a plot-driven writer. So most of my stories come out of an idea I've had about a person, and then I just sort of take the story wherever I think the person would go, if that makes sense. I don't know. I think I'm rambling.
No, absolutely. No, that makes sense. And I'm just thinking about, so some of the ideas are quite strange and quite unique. So if I think about something like Skin, for example, the short story in Corpsing about the girl that gets bitten by the spider. So that, I think that's a prime example, right, of a character-based story. So with
Yeah.
that one, did you have an idea of the character first?
Yeah, I usually have an idea of the character first. So like the stories that are sort of straight up horror, I usually start with a character, and I with a short story, I never ever plot. I usually just get sort of like the nugget of an idea. I sit down and I usually do the first draft in one sitting. It depends on how long it is, obviously, but all of the stories in Corpsing, I know I wrote them all in one sitting each. And I never know where they're going. I just sort of follow them wherever they end, which is why some of my endings are lesser than others. I think, but yeah, the straight up horrors usually come out of just oh, what if that one was, what if a girl got bitten by a spider and strange things happened, but maybe it wasn't the spider, or maybe it was. And some of the others in Corpsing came out of because most of these were previously published in other anthologies. That most of those anthologies were for charity, and they all had themes that I had to stick to. So sometimes, if there's a theme, I struggle to try and fit a story I was already mulling over into the theme. But most of the time, I'll just get the idea just straight out of the theme, like it'll hit me. So Bits and Bobs is in Corpsing is about Stephen Plunkett, who wants to work around dead bodies, and that was originally published in a charity anthology for organ donation called I think it was Give, an Anthology of Anatomical Entries, and the brief for that was that it had to be the story of an organ donor, and it had to be a pair of organs, so kidneys or lungs or whatever. So I childishly went with testicles.
Of course.
And I was trying to think of, because I knew it would be a horror anthology, I was trying to veer away from, stolen kidneys, iced in the bathtub and that kind of stuff. I was trying to think of another way to approach it. So that's usually, if it's a theme I'm sticking with, then that's usually what happens, is I'll get an idea for the plot or the story or whatever, and then try and veer out of where I think everybody else might write.
So try and do something individual and unique.
Yeah, because I think that's a problem with anthologies, is when you give in a theme, it's great, but a lot of the time when people are trying to think out of the box, they end up thinking quite similarly to the other writers in the book. Because I read a few anthologies where you're turning page after page and the stories are can be a bit samey, depending on what the guidelines were. Not always, and that's not always to say that the stories are usually really good and unique on their own anyway, but I try and just stay as far away from anything I think someone else might think of as possible. I'm sure everybody does that though, but
well, it's something I'm always interested in, is about like original thought, especially in a genre which has a lot of constraints, say like horror. That there's so much material out there, and so many tropes has been recycled again and again. So like, is the original thought, the original idea, is that something very important to you?
yeah, I think so, because I've learned since becoming part of the indie horror community, I've realized that it's a smaller group of people than I thought it was, like just horror writers in general. So I find, like especially with the internet existing, like we all sort of cross paths a lot, and I see the same names a lot, and you end up in discussions with people halfway across the world, and then you'll appear in a book alongside them. And because we're all sort of like close that way, and a lot of us read, there are like thousands of horror writers to read, but a lot of us read the same sort of like the major press ones, like the people who are published by major publishers. So obviously like your Stephen Kings and your like Ramsey Campbell, Adam Neville is everywhere at the moment, which is great. But because I think we read and watch a lot of the same thing, we've got common interests. I think sometimes we think alike when we're writing as well. That was a really long rambling answer, but yeah, so I try to think of something, I try and go like extra unique, but sometimes I still end up writing something similar to someone else. Like I've had so many ideas where I've started writing a story and then I've either seen or read something which is incredibly similar to the thing I'm writing, and then I abandon it because I like, oh, I can't believe I thought I was the first person to think of that and I wasn't. And then other times I'm halfway through an idea and then I realise that I actually saw that idea somewhere else, but years ago, and I forgot, buried it in my subconscious somewhere, and then it's resurfaced and I think it was my idea.
And what happens when that happens? Do you stop it, or do you continue to write thinking, well, I'm just taking this as inspiration because it won't come out exactly the same?
If I realised that I'm actually using somebody else's idea, but I thought of it first, I usually just abandon it entirely. I can't think of the name of. I started writing a story once called Coffin Club with a K, because kids, and it was about I probably good idea I abandoned this anyway because it was a rubbish story, but it's just about like where kids go when they pass away, and I'd set it in this sort of like afterlife morgue thing where whenever a kid dies they wake up in a coffin sort of in a different realm, and then they have like a birthday party as like they open the coffin and everyone's there like welcome. And I thought that was a really unique idea, and I'm not really sure what the point of it was or where I was going to go with that. But then I rented out a film just by chance when I was in uni from the uni library. I just literally picked something off the shelf at random. And it was a film based entirely on that premise, like exactly the same thing. And then I realised I saw it years ago. I'd forgotten about it.
Oh no.
So I had just sort of unintentionally ripped off an entire plot and concept. So that kind of thing I abandon. But if I realise sometimes that I'm writing something similar to something that exists, I just try and make sure I won't read the rest of the thing that I was reading that was similar to what I was writing. So that I can't go down the same path intentionally. And then I carry on writing and then just hope that I didn't write a lesser version of something better.
Yeah, because you don't want to be influenced by that thing and have that thing make your decisions or change your decisions for you from your own unique vision, right?
Yeah, especially if because what I always worry about is the thing that's similar. What if it goes in a much better direction than the thing I was planning, and then I'm just going to be sort of jealously going, oh, now I have to change my idea because it's not as good as this idea. So yeah.
You talked earlier about speaking to other horror writers and people kind of reading similar books. So I was kind of curious, what would you say, or who would you say are your influences when it comes to reading and it comes to your writing?
Well, Stephen King is the obvious one, which I never like to say because that is such a cliche for a horror fan and horror writer to be a Stephen King fan. But I used to read like for some reason all of the women in my family read Stephen King. Like we're all readers and everybody reads Stephen King. Like everybody has every Stephen King book ever brought out. Because my aunties and my mum were reading him from when he, first wrote Carrie. And I used to beg my mum to read those books when I was a kid, and she'd now and then she'd pick one that she thought was sort of age appropriate for me. But Stephen King is that was like the starting point, because I don't always actually like the overall story, but I always love his characters so much, and I think that's I've only recently realised that that's probably why I'm such a character-focused writer, because it was never an intentional decision, but I just care so much more about character than plot, which is to my detriment many times, a lot, when I'm trying to start something with an idea and then I don't know where it's going, and I've abandoned more things than I finished because of that. But so Stephen King, and then Christopher Pike was my absolute favorite when I went into my teenage years. He wrote a book called Monster, and it opens with a girl bursting into a party and just gunning a couple of people down. And she's very specific about who she's gunning down, but no one knows what's going on. And it was like I thought I haven't read it for years, but I thought it was really gory when I read it and detailed, and I couldn't believe, like, I was like, oh, my mum got this for me because it was in the teen horror section, and she doesn't know that I'm reading about guts being splattered on the wall, and I thought it was the greatest thing ever. I really, I don't know, I really got into like monster horror, like werewolves, vampires, like the supernatural horror, and then I got obsessed with like those point horror books. I used to go to the library and I'd check out 10 books a time from the point horror section or the teenage horror section, but they were always the point horror books. And I'd read all 10 in a fortnight, and then I'd go back and get another 10. And I read every teen horror book in the library. I ran out. So those teen horror, like Sean Hudson, I'm trying to think of other writers because I never paid attention to the writers. I think R.L. Stine wrote some of those point horrors as well. I never read the Goosebumps books, but yeah, there were loads of those. So I'm giving you really long, rambling answers to these questions.
No, not at all, not at all. It's interesting, you know. There's a lot of influences, and you can see, you can plot your history of your reading through horror. And it's interesting that you mentioned Stephen King and you mentioned the character point there, which is real focus of what you were describing on your own writing. And you talked about the fact that you focused on the character to the detriment to yourself, sometimes on the plot, because you might start something and abandon it. And so I'm curious about your actual writing process. So thinking about the books in the stories in Corpsing is like as a jumping off point here. You know, how do you write them? So you come up with a character first. You're not plotting them, you say?
No, I never plot for a short story because sometimes the entire story comes to my mind in like one go. So it's like I see the whole story in my mind before I sit down, so I know exactly where I'm going with it. And then other times I just get sort of the beginning of a story comes to me, and then I just start writing it, and then just hope that I'll get to the end. And usually that works for me with a short. I actually find that more difficult with flash fiction because you're so restricted. So you've got to really refine your writing in that case, and I find it hard to think of like entire stories that you can fit into something under 1,000 words.
And you talked about the fact that you kind of write, sometimes you see the ending in sight, sometimes you don't, and you just kind of write to discover where that's going to go and then get to the end. And you mentioned that actually you, like all the stories in Corpsing, all of them were sat down and written in one session for each story. You sat down and you just wrote that out.
Yeah.
Do you then, so that's getting that first draft in. Was there much in the way of an editing process afterwards? Like, did you go back and refine them? Was there much changes, or do they just come out exactly right the first time?
Oh no, they never come out exactly right the first time. I've got a tendency to like sometimes it seems like I have a favorite word of the day, and somehow that sneaks it into every other sentence I write. So I'll have, I'll decide that someone is very serious, and I use the word serious or seriously, and then on the read through after I've finished writing it, I realize that I've written that word 10,000 times, and my notes to myself are like, oh my god, find another word. What why are you obsessed with this word today? And I do that every single time, so there's always that where I sort of repeat myself in the actual prose. Usually with a short story, I don't feel the need to alter the actual story very much, but I'm just trying to improve the writing itself. And one thing I do have a problem with is dialogue, because I have to read that out loud to myself now when I'm rereading my own things before I send them to anyone, because I, for some reason, write really corny dialogue, and I don't know why. Like, I use words and phrases that people would just never use in real life.
And has that always been a problem? I mean, I'm right in saying, from what we spoke to before, you've written plays before, is that right?
Yeah, I was actually about to mention so the first play I wrote, it was for a script writing class, and it was basically a theatre sitcom called Kill 'Em in the Brain, about four people holed up in a flat in Newport during the zombie apocalypse.
Oh, fantastic.
And I was very surprised when it got picked up to be staged, and it's been staged twice, and it went really well. So and that was a case of I really should have plotted that, because it was a 90-minute, like an hour and a half, and I didn't plot that. I just made that up as I went along. But then I redrafted it, 10,000 times. But the dialogue in that, when it was being staged the first time, I was asked if I wanted to co-direct, but I really, I don't know anything about directing, but I said no, but I would like to just sit and watch the rehearsal process, because I was really interested in how different it would be, where, because the thing you write is never taken the same way by the people who are reading it. So I was, I just sort of sat in the back of the theatre and just watched them as they staged it and rehearsed it. And a lot of the lines, as when I wrote them, I thought they were fine, but when you actually hear people say them, I was like, oh my god, why would a 20-year-old ever use the word whore? It's just and so, like, now and then, like, there'd just be an awkward, like, pause, and then the director would turn around and be like, do you mind if we just change this line a little bit? And I'd be like, no, please, for the love of God, don't use the thing I wrote, because people will know I wrote this. Adapt as you see fit. And that was like the first time I realized that my dialogue is shit.
Right. Okay. And did you learn from that then?
Oh yeah, it was a great learning experience, because it taught me then, so that when I'm proofreading, I read everything out loud in character if possible, and then I hear it as soon as it comes out of my mouth. Like, if it feels awkward to say, I know that it's not the right thing to write. So I'd like to think that I've improved with that since corpsing. I don't think it's awful in some of these stories. There's not a lot of dialogue in some of them, anyway. But yeah, I think the main thing that I go back and change after a draft is I just try and tighten up my writing. I always wish, even if I think the story's okay, I always just wish I was a better writer in general.
I think every writer strives to be better. That's part of the creative process, isn't it, really?
Yeah. I think we're all in the same boat, like the same boat with that, I think.
So one of the things that is interesting, you being a Stephen King fan, so I assume that you've read his On Writing book.
Yes, that is a great book.
So I'm curious, with your editing, he talks about the fact that, isn't it, the second draft is the first draft minus 10% or something?
Yeah, I think he said he cuts about 30%.
About 30%.
I could be wrong. I have read that a couple of times, but it's been a few years now.
And so when you do your editing process, is that similar? Do you find that you're taking stuff out, or are you adding stuff in?
I tend to take stuff out, but it's not necessarily always like content. It's I reword my sentences. So I sometimes I've made a point, but I've taken an entire paragraph to say something that I could say in one sentence. So I try to edit down that way if I've sort of waffled, where I could have used better language to express the same thing. With a short story, in terms of content, I usually end up adding, because when I write that first draft, I'm kind of just getting the story down. And then I'll usually find, I'd really like to add this little character detail, or I'd like to go back and add a bit more into the setup of the thing that's going to happen later. So I probably add content, but overall I cut word count, because I'm cutting down, my paragraphs and my sentences and stuff.
Yeah, so you're making them kind of more efficient, more succinct.
Yeah, and I try and stay. That's another thing that in that On Writing book by Stephen King, he said was it him? I might be thinking of a different writer actually. The way to hell is paved with adverbs.
Yes, that's in there. Yeah, that's right.
And I use adverbs sometimes, but in general, I think he said that if you use an adverb and you read the sentence, is the sentence stronger or weaker with the adverb included? So I don't just apply that to adverbs. I apply it to any way I've described anything. Or, when you've got stretches of dialogue and you've got, he said, she said, he said, she said, and then you start trying to find other ways of saying said. So you'll be like, he laughed, she shouted, and then I go through things like that and go, wait, could I just say that they're talking? Why have I tried to force different dialogue descriptors in?
Yeah, it's a tricky balance, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm always just in a sort of crippling state of self-doubt. Like, I'll write a story, and as I'm writing it, I'll feel pretty good. Like, oh, I think this is a decent story. Then I read it and decide that it's terrible. I should have done something else at uni. Have no talent. Why didn't I take up a trade? And then I, cut myself some slack and go to bed. And then the next day I get up and look at it again and go, right, no, I think it's okay, actually.
Is that something that commonly happens with your work and your creative process?
Every single time.
Every time. So you need that distance away from it for going to sleep and then coming up and looking at it with fresh eyes to appreciate it again.
Yes, and this is where I'm more comfortable with short stories than longer form, because this is why I still don't have a finished novel. I am so close to finishing one now, finally, but since August I've been saying I will have finished this by the end of the month. I'll have finished it, and I keep editing it, and I can't stop. It's an obsession, because with a short story, say I've got a 5,000 word story, I can only edit that so much and decide to a certain degree that it's crap before I go, oh, come on, is it? Let's give it to some other people to read, and then they can give me feedback, because maybe I'm too close to it to be a good judge of whether this is any good. But with what I'm finding with this novel, it's so huge compared to a short story. I keep finding new things wrong with it. So I've started and abandoned 3 novels in the past. I always hit the 40,000 word mark, and that seems to be where it goes wrong, and then I get into a rage and delete it.
Oh, you delete the work, do you?
Always. Every time. I've vowed to never do that again now, because in hindsight I might have rage deleted things that had potential. I won't do it with this one, because I'm on the last draft, I promised myself, and I'm 1 chapter away from the end.
Okay.
I'm up to 130,000 words, which is a mammoth.
That's big.
Um,
So just go back to your rage deleting. Would you say, looking back now, if you could talk to yourself, you would say you wouldn't do that? And if anyone else out there has that tendency to think, oh, I'm just going to delete something because they hate it, you think it's actually probably better to keep that?
Yeah, for the love of God, don't rage delete something you've worked on, because I've got stories. I would say, if you're really sick of it and you're convinced it's terrible, just put it away somewhere and move on to something else for a bit, or just take a break from it. Like, give yourself a couple of weeks away, so that when you go back and you look at it with fresh eyes, you'll be able to see where it's strong and where it's weak. I've got folders full of unpublished shorts that I've written, and I never submitted anyway, because I wrote them, thought they were really good at the time, left it a couple of weeks, and then went back and read them and thought, well, this is a load of crap. But I've kept them because sometimes they're not a load of crap and they are actually usable, like publishable, and I was just being too hard on myself. And then the ones that are bad teach me things about my own writing style that I need to work on. So things like with the dialogue being a bit unrealistic and stuff, I read that in my older stories, and whenever I notice something like that and something I wrote a while ago, I'd like to think that I've improved since then, and that's why I can see it now, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So every experience is a learning experience if it doesn't yield a good product at the end, at least.
Yeah, I think, because I think if you want to write, I think it is important to read, and sometimes reading bad books is as helpful, if not more helpful, than reading well-written books. And I extend that to my own work as well. So if I, I have some stuff that I know is absolute trash, but like I sit there trying to work out what's wrong with it, because sometimes I can't, it's not obvious to me. So yeah, I wouldn't, I'll never rage delete anything again, I say now.
You say that now.
It feels so satisfying in the moment.
I bet.
Into the trash can with you.
Corpsing is a collection, so it's stories that largely had been published elsewhere and then were collected together to create the collection. So therefore, they're written over a relatively kind of long period, each with their own kind of agenda, as in to go to a different publication, etc. But then when it was all collected together and you looked at it as the stories, was there anything you would say, any kind of themes or messages that you found that you were commonly exploring within those stories?
Yes, unintentionally. One thing I noticed that was pointed out to me really in other people's reviews of stuff, including when they were in those anthologies and people, break down what they thought of each story. A lot of the feedback I had about Skin in particular was that there's a deep feeling of self-hatred running through my work thematically. And just sort of in various levels of self-hatred or self-esteem issues, which I now find funny, but I guess I see it now when I look back on the stories in Corpsing. I'm like, oh yeah. Whenever I've been talking about a protagonist, there does seem to be, something deeply wrong in their psyche in that regard. And also death, I seem to be a bit obsessed with that, because that seems to appear in all various forms. That's probably a common thing with horror writers in general, though, the death thing. But
yeah, so going back to that self-hatred, that self-loathing kind of theme that you said that was being seen through them, and you said you kind of wrote that unintentionally. Why do you think that was? Was that a self-projection of your own mental state whilst writing them or working something through, or was that more because that's the way you like to draw characters at that time?
I think it's just different bits of my personality coming out in sort of fictitious events, because I don't think I have it as sort of deep self-hatred or anything of myself. I do have, self-esteem issues when it comes to my actual writing, which I think most writers probably do. I don't know many writers that think they're amazing. So that, but so the straight up horror stories, I very rarely, like, I do enjoy writing them, but it's not the same as when I write a comedy horror. So I think basically what happens is if I'm in a real sort of positive, like jovial mood, that's when things like Bitey Backman and S-Day come out, where I'm just sort of having a laugh. I get an idea and I decide that this is just going to be an unfortunate character in a silly situation, and I really enjoy writing it. And sometimes I find myself really hilarious. And when I was writing these stories, I'd been working at a holiday park during holiday park season, and in between, in the off season, I was back at my mum's. So I was writing a lot of these stories just up in my bedroom at my mum's, and she said she could just hear me tittering up there as I typed away at my own stories. So I was writing, finding myself great and funny. And then the straight up horror stories, I find myself, like, I'll start those and then I'm suddenly plunged into this horrible frame of mind where everything is black and miserable, and I'm just sort of because the character I'm writing isn't a happy person normally, or something bad is happening to them, and I really put myself there, but not on purpose. It just sort of happens. And then when I finished, it feels like I purged something, but it's not really come out of anything that's happening in my life. It's just I really don't know where it comes from. Maybe I just have some dark brooding feelings. They just want to come out.
You talk there about the comedy and the comedy horror, because you've got very much, there's two different kind of tones that runs through Corpsing, and I've seen it through your other work as well, where some is comedy horror that's really funny, and other is just pure horror. Mm-hmm. So when you actually sit down to write a story, do you know before you start what tone it's going to be?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, I don't.
How is that based? Is that based on the idea that's come out, or the mood you're in when you sat down?
Yeah, the idea that I've had dictates the mood. So yeah, Bitey Backman, I had the whole idea for that just came to me in one go, and I knew that I was gonna try and make that more a funny story, like a light funny story. But I think it's a weird circle, I suppose, because the tone of the story obviously dictates the mood I'm in when I'm writing, but the mood that I'm in when I get the idea dictates the story. I don't know. I'm not explaining.
Yeah, it dictates the tone, the mood that you're in dictates the tone of the idea.
Yeah.
And then that then feeds and changes the tone and dictates the tone of what you're doing when you're actually sat down writing. That makes sense.
Yeah, so it's not a story in Corpsing, but a story I recently wrote for you, actually. That came about because I was lying in bed trying to sleep. I had insomnia for no apparent reason. Sometimes I just get bouts of it, and I was really frustrated because I had stuff I had to do the next day. So not being able to sleep the night before really stresses me out. And then once it occurs to me that I'm having problems falling asleep, there is no chance I will sleep. It puts me in such a bad mood, and it really stresses me out. And then while I was in that mind frame, the story that I most recently wrote came to me. So I thought, right, well, I'm not asleep, and now I've got this idea for a story. So I got out of bed at, like, I don't know, 3 o'clock in the morning or something, and I sat down and wrote the story. And then I was able to go to sleep when I was done. But yeah, I was just in a foul mood writing that because I was up in the middle of the night. You know, I think it was like the second night in a row I couldn't sleep, but I was exhausted. So I was just, in a pissy mood.
Were you in a pissy mood by the time you'd finished it? I mean, I've read the story, and people will at some point. It's a fantastic story. By the time you got to the end and you created this, had your mood changed?
Yeah, when I finished it, I was like, I felt better about the insomnia thing, just because I'd been productive in those hours awake, where usually I'm just lying awake being really annoyed that I'm not asleep. So I felt like satisfied that I'd actually done something worthwhile with the time. And because I mean, there are writers that write much nastier things than I do. I don't know how capable I am of writing something that's like really, really nasty, but for me, this was quite a nasty story. So yeah, I did feel sort of like lighter when I finished it. I sat back and just went, well, like this. The world seems like a better place because I'm not in this world right now. Another place that recent one came from is just that I recently read Kit Power's Breaking Point. A collection of first person, they're all told in the first person, short stories. I've had that book for ages, and I was convinced I'd already read it, and then I couldn't remember reading it though, so I picked it up again, and I was like, oh my god, no, I haven't read this. And I wanted to try and write something in the first person because I'm not very comfortable with that, so I'm trying to push myself a bit. So I'd been working on a different story that was written in the first person, but I thought it was absolute trash, and that was the story I was originally writing for you, which I've put on the back burner for now because I just don't think it's very good, because I was trying to force a first person narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was surprised when this other idea came to me, and that felt so natural to write because I don't know, maybe rage writing is a good thing. Let's see.
Anger is a gift, to quote Rage Against the Machine.
Yes, exactly.
So going back to the horror and the comedy part that we were just talking about. Now, horror and comedy, they're two genres, two completely opposing genres when you think about the emotions within them. And so to blend them together, that's quite a tricky thing to do, to get that blend right and for it to work. You are one of those people that I think does it very successfully. So I'm really curious about, how do you mix the two together? How do you balance that tone when you're writing the story, to balance the tone of how much horror, how much comedy?
This is a bit of a non-answer, but I don't think about it at all, because if I use 'Twas the Night Before Christmas as an example, that's about twin boys who they go out into the woods with their dad to cut down a Christmas tree, and then with strange results. Just going back to, because I'm usually thinking about character first, and I find it easier to think about character when I'm writing something that's a bit lighter, because I feel like I've got more time to get their character across if I'm going for comedy more than straight up horror. I don't know why. I think I'm just more comfortable, because I think you get to know people in light circumstances. What makes someone laugh, what makes them angry, and everything. And then once I sort of feel like I know the character, I just start thinking about what things I'm going to inflict on them, and what I'm thinking about more than anything is how they'll react to it. So however the tone comes out is just sort of how it comes out. I think if I sat down and I tried to think, right, I want this to be comedy horror, but I want it to be 70% leaning into horror and it's 30% a bit funny, I think I'd fail. I don't know. I don't know if I've got an answer for that, because
so you kind of do it sort of instinctively.
Yes, I don't think about the balance as I'm going along. I'm just sort of using, because I suppose the comedy horror stuff probably isn't scary, but I'm using horror elements and just trying to put them into circumstances or with people where it would be funny, rather than if I did it straight and played it for horror.
So the horror tropes effectively you're using is kind of a framing device for the comedy. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. See.
And would you say, is there any horror comedies that you think has influenced you over your time? Because if you're doing this instinctively, I'm just wondering, is there some things that you've, like films maybe you've watched, or TV series, or books, which you've kind of absorbed and know so well that helped to shape that instinct?
Yeah, and it's not a horror in any regard, but it's Airplane. Oh my God.
Love that movie.
Swear to God, Airplane changed my life when I saw that as a kid, because I found it so funny because it's so silly. And when I was younger, I didn't understand what was so great about it. I just knew it was great. And it was as I got older that I realized that the genius of Airplane is that all the actors are playing it straight. So nobody's putting on like a comedy performance. They're all playing this like a disaster film. Especially like some are a bit like campier than others, but Ted is just, he's so serious for the whole film. I don't know, I don't know how many times I've seen Airplane, and whenever someone says they haven't seen it, I just don't know what they're doing with their life, honestly. It's I don't know, like I think that film is that is a comedy film. But I think that does balance tone so well, because all of the comedy is coming out of the disaster that's unfolding and how everybody's taking to it.
Yeah, and it's what you were saying, isn't it? It's about the fact that the threat is still really there, the disaster's still really there, and that disaster movie trope has been like, that's the framing device, isn't it, for the comedy to sit around?
Yeah. The stuff that makes me laugh. Scary Movie really made me laugh when I was younger as well. I don't know how funny I'd find it now, but it's just it's the really stupid little physical gags that are just played for with nobody's reacting like it's stupid that really get me. So like, my favorite shot of Airplane, the whole film, isn't, it's not even, other people have told me it's not even that funny, but it's right at the beginning when Ted's running through the airport, and I think someone's got their hands held out like they're trying to sell him something, or they ask if he wants to make a donation or something, and he just shrugs his jacket off into their hands. And it just like, it's just stuff like that really gets me. Is it a Scary Movie 3, the one where they did Signs? And there's a really stupid bit in that where the sheriff's hat, the rim of her hat gets wider every time it cuts away and goes back to her. It's so stupid, but it just, oh, people not reacting to ridiculous things, like that's what I think that's what I find really funny, and I think that's what I try and write in, or I write characters that are reacting to ridiculous things and they're just pointing out that they're ridiculous, but the things are still happening. I don't know. I think I find myself funnier than other people find me. So bodes well for my writing career.
It's never a bad thing to laugh at your own jokes. I know that.
The number of times I've sat there writing one of these stories and I've found myself absolutely hilarious, and I'm just laughing out loud at the things as I'm typing it, and then I'll give it to somebody. Usually my poor mum, honestly, she has read so much crap from me, but the number of times that I've handed it to her or somebody else, and I'm one of those annoying people where if I've printed it off and given it to someone, then I'll sit there and be like, oh yeah, read it whenever you want, but read it now in front of me. And then I'm just waiting to see if they're laughing at the bits where I think they've read up to. And if they're not like howling with laughter, I'm like, right, I failed. Clearly.
So I was going to ask about like, do you use beta readers? So you do, but you sit there and watch them read?
No, I mean like only with my mum, only because it annoys her. When I wrote the stories that ended up in Corpsing, I didn't know that there was such thing as like beta readers, because I was so new to publishing, and some of these stories were amongst the first things I ever had published. I'm just having a look now. I'm just trying to remember, because it's a few years back for some of these. Now You See Them was a flash fiction. I think that might have been my second thing I ever had published. Yeah, most of these were quite early on, so I just really didn't have a clue what I was doing. I was just writing stories and then hoping to find people who would like them enough to print them in anthologies. I wish I'd known about beta readers back then, because I think that would have really I think some like critical feedback would have really helped me. I definitely use them now, and there's a couple of, I haven't sent anything to anyone for ages because I've been working on this novel all year, so I really haven't written a lot otherwise. In the past, I've nagged Kit Power to read a couple of things for me. My auntie and my mum always want to proofread things for me, but the problem with them is that they will not criticize what I write. So I'll say that, you know, be as brutal as possible, like literally any little thing, just underline it, tell me why you think it's wrong. You know, please, like, tear it to pieces is what I really want. And then my mum will hand something back to me and be like, oh, I loved it, there's nothing wrong with it. And I'm like, oh, well, that's nice, but really unhelpful.
Because that's the thing you're looking for from a beta reader, really, isn't it? It's tell me where I've gone wrong, not where I've gone right.
Yeah, and I mean down to like the slightest thing. So sometimes I'll read feedback and someone will be like, oh, maybe tighten this sentence up, or I don't really like this wording, and I'll consider it. And sometimes I think, oh yeah, they're right. That's really sloppy writing. And then other times I'll think, oh no, I wrote that for a reason, so I'm going to stick with it. So I don't always take 100% of the feedback, but I really appreciate. I usually like sort of 3 or 4 people to read something, because then if they've all got problems with the same couple of things, then I'll be like, right, even if I'm being stubborn about this, this is just a thing that people don't like when they're reading. So then I will consider changing things more. But yes, I'm probably going to be a real nag for Kit when I've done a few more shorts, because he taught me a grammar thing that I've gone through my entire school, college, uni life writing as much as possible, and nobody told me this like one grammar rule that I was like a basic grammar that I've been doing wrong my entire life. And then Kit proofread something for me, and he was like, oh, did you know that you don't do this?
And what was that?
It was capitalizing the first word after you close speech marks every time. So if I'm going to the park, said John, I would write said with a capital S.
Right, yeah.
And Kit was like, oh, and then he was the one who taught me, like, right, that's not the end of the sentence, so you don't do that in that case. And I was like, what? I'm in my 20s. At the time I was, anyway. And I never knew that, because I have never once been corrected. And I was like, how did I go through a degree with nobody correcting that? But I mean, I didn't do a creative writing degree where I'm sure it would have been picked up, but you know what I mean. I was like, I was in school for so many years, and I just thought, like, I felt so stupid. I was like, I can't believe that I've been sending stuff to publishers and presses, like, oh, please publish my work, and I can't get basic grammar right. So
it's interesting, isn't it? When I first started writing, there was some basic grammar which I hadn't really got in my head, because I hadn't written like that, like in creative writing. I'd read stuff, but I hadn't had those rules sort of put into my head. And it was only going back and looking at stuff like where the comma goes after a speech mark. I didn't, before or after, I didn't know until I started writing.
Yeah, and then even if you read a lot, some things are stylistic choices, and there are writers that do their own thing. And then there are differences between American and British. There is some differences with grammar there as well. So yeah, I was so that was like the single best bit of feedback I ever had for grammar, because I was like, oh, I'm glad I know now, so that I don't make an idiot of myself forever. Just like, just trust me, I can write good.
I write's good, I do.
I'm actually wondering if I knew that before or after Corpsing came out. I really hope it was before. I think
I'm going to say it before. I definitely didn't edit it to change those things, and I would have picked that up.
Yeah. No, I think it's safe. It's okay.
You're okay. So coming back to Corpsing, the collection in itself, I want to talk about the package, the book. Not just the writing. So the first thing I want to talk about is like the cover, the cover design. So how did that come about?
Michael Bray did the cover, and I love it. I think it's, yeah, I was really, really happy when I actually saw it. I knew I wanted the theatre tragedy comedy masks, because I just thought that fits so well because it's a book of comedy and horror comedy stories. So I thought that would be a good cover image for the tone of the book.
Yeah.
But obviously I didn't design this, because as well as, getting simple grammar things wrong, I also can't draw. So yeah, no, I was really happy with how it turned out, because it was exactly what I had in my mind, really. There's like little blood splashes on there and everything for its little horror edge.
So you had the book, the cover, you've got the stories, the book's ready to go, you've got a proof copy of it, you've seen it. If you can cast your mind back to that point, the book's just about to come out. How are you feeling?
if I remember correctly, I think I was really, really excited, but also really terrified, because unlike having a story in an anthology, anyone who bought this was just buying my work. So I was suddenly very concerned about the quality of my writing and whether or not the stories were any good and the usual stuff. And also, I got really ill the week it was being released. I think I either had mumps or tonsillitis. I think it was tonsillitis. And I was off work and I was on crazy antibiotics and I slept through the entire day that the book came out.
Oh no.
I believe that there was some sort of online launch party that I missed. I was passed out on painkillers and antibiotics. That kind of took the edge off the fear for me a little bit, because being so ill, I couldn't really, I just wasn't conscious. So, yeah, I just remember being really nervous before it came out, and I was alternating between thinking, right, well, this is your first thing, so don't put so much pressure on yourself for it to be the greatest thing you've ever written, because you will write better things. And then, so I'd switch between that, because I don't know what kind of reviews or response I was expecting at the time. I was I was wavering very dramatically between it's fine, it's your first release, and oh my God, you've just killed your career if it's rubbish. You'll never write again. Well, I'm a very positive person about my own stuff, can you tell?
Clearly.
This is such great self-promotion for me, this podcast. Buy my book. I don't know if it's good.
You talk about the like the critical reaction and then that coming out. So what was the critical reaction?
It was very positive, and I think I read one sort of 3.5 star review, and then most of them were 4 and 5.
How did you then take that?
I was just really overwhelmed because people were just saying such nice things, and the quality of my writing was praised, and that made me feel so much better, because I really struggle with how I feel about my own writing, because you know, like when you read a story and you hate the writer because they're so good, and you think, well, there's no point in writing ever again because I'll never write anything this good, and you're just jealous of how talented they are. I feel that way about like a lot of writers. Like I really enjoy the reading experience, but then I'm comparing myself to them and sort of beating myself up all the time. So to read reviews from people who don't know me, and they've got no obligation to, like, you know, my feelings about how I might react or anything. And yeah, it was really encouraging. It did make me feel like, oh, okay. I just felt like I could breathe a bit, and then just enjoy the next thing I was going to write, rather than worrying so much about how other people would take it. But also, I did feel like, right, I'll listen to the things that people thought were a little bit weak, and I'll try and work on those things. And then the things that people commonly liked about these stories, I'll try and draw more on those, because those are obviously like my strengths. So yeah, it was really nice. I got nervous every time someone was like, oh, I've seen this review of your book. I was like, oh, I got a bit obsessed with checking Amazon and Goodreads.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. I don't know how I would have reacted if I'd had a really bad review, because I am a little bit oversensitive, and I think I take criticism quite well now, but back a few years back when this came out and I was new, I think I'm glad that there was nothing soul destroying. I kind of eagerly await the day, though, that somebody reads something of mine that they hate so much that they feel the need to take to the internet with it, because that really cracks me up when I'm like looking for books I might buy and I see a really angry review where someone has just been so mad that they've, you know, taken the trouble to turn the computer on and type out a rant.
With the stories in corpsing, one of the things I always like to ask people with their books is, so we've got the finished article. Was there anything that didn't make it into the book. So was there any stories where bits that you changed, or thoughts you had in the stories but decided not to put them in? Or was there other stories that you were going to put in and decided not to?
I think at the time, I think I was happy with the stuff that the stories I put in here. I really wish that I'd written a few more to add that were especially for this book, and not just a collection of previously published. I wish I'd added some more things in, and I really wish that I'd added a little introduction for the previously published ones to explain what the brief was when I originally wrote it. Because some of the reviews, as nice as they were, there was a common criticism I remember reading was that some of these stories just felt like unfinished. They were just too short. And it would still apply, I suppose, if I didn't wrap the stories up well enough anyway. But that some of these, I was on such a tight word count limit. I guess I was kind of rushing to the end, or the ending was a bit abrupt. So yeah, that's two things. And there's one story that I had previously published, which I decided not to include in this. And I kind of wish I did include. Where it was called Leather, and it was published in an anthology called Unleash the Undead by Sammy Sands. And the story was called Leather, and it's about a zombie apocalypse that's broken out, and the main character is a dominatrix, and she's out looking for somebody, and she comes across her submissive, who is a zombie now, and he is going to attack her, but then she starts using her usual commands with him, so he obeys. So that's just like a kind of silly little story, but I kind of wish I'd put that one in the book. Now that I've said it again, maybe I now remember why I didn't actually. I don't think I executed the idea as well as I think the concept in my mind was better than my execution of it. But yeah, sorry, I rambled again. But yeah, I wish I'd just written a few extra original stories for it.
Yeah, there was one story that there was a change, which I know because there is two versions that exist out in the world. So the story Skin was originally published in Black Room Manuscripts Volume 1. And then when it was reprinted in Corpsing, there was a slight change to the ending.
Yes, I remember. I actually forgot about that until you just mentioned it, because I remember. Am I remembering this right? You liked the original ending.
Yes.
And then I changed it. I'm looking at it now, right this second.
Yeah, so when it was submitted over, I said, "Oh, you've changed the ending. I prefer the first ending." And you actually came back and said, "No, I prefer this ending. So I'd like to put this ending in. The original ending still exists, and it's out there in Black Room Manuscripts Volume 1, so people can read that, but they can have this version for Corpsing." And I believe, was it to do with there was some reviews and there was a bit of critical feedback which you'd read about in some of the reviews?
Yes, that's right. A reviewer who I always agree with when I read his reviews of other people's work, said that he really liked the story, and then the ending just fell flat. And the reason that I decided to change it is because when I originally wrote that and submitted it for Black Room Manuscripts, I really didn't like the ending at all. But I couldn't for the life of me figure out what was wrong with it, so I left it as it was. And I have that problem with endings all the time. I really struggle with endings. So because somebody else had voiced what I thought was wrong, it was like confirmation to me. I was like, yeah, I need to do something with that. I don't know which ending people would prefer. I have no idea. It just never sat right with me, and I never liked it. So
So
Yeah.
the new ending you added on, did you prefer that one? Did that one feel better for you?
I feel like I went off into corny territory the first time with the ending, I think is what it was, if I remember. And then this one didn't feel so much so. Because I think that there was a bit of dialogue at the end, and as you know, I hate my own dialogue, so I think I cut it.
So that's talking about the things that you would changed in the book or would have changed in the book. So what about the things that you wouldn't have changed? Is there anything or any details in the book that you're particularly proud of?
I think the story that I'm most proud of in here is Bitey Backman, even though that isn't the most popular story for readers. Usually in reviews and stuff, people usually either talk about Skin or Siren, the S's, the S stories. So I prefer my comedy horrors, but I think as far as reviewers go, they prefer just like my straight up horrors. But Bitey Backman is the most fun I've ever had writing something, and it's the one where if I reread it now, sort of looking for things to poke holes in, I'm still pretty happy with it. I am happy that I mixed up sort of two different genres in one collection as well, rather than just sticking with one tone for the whole book.
One question that I didn't ask earlier on, but I do like to ask because I'm always interested in it. When you're writing, do you listen to music, or do you like to write in silence, or have the TV on? How do you create that atmosphere when you're writing?
I usually need silence. If I'm writing something that's remotely funny, I need complete silence, and I made like my attic into a little office, so I usually go up there and pull the ladder up behind me so that I feel really secluded. I have no distractions. And then sometimes if I'm writing something that's just scary or I'm hoping it'll be scary, I'll listen to sort of soundtracks or instrumental music to try and put myself, like, sometimes I try to make myself scared before I start writing.
Okay, but with music, right?
Yeah, with music, yeah, I try, like, because sometimes I want to write something scary, but I'm just really not feeling like in that kind of mood. So I'll put sometimes I listen to soundtracks from films I like. Like I got really obsessed with In the House in a Heartbeat, the John Murphy 28 Days Later soundtrack.
Yeah.
But then I found that I really couldn't concentrate because I was picturing scenes from 28 Days Later. So now I usually look for instrumental. Like, I can't have anything with vocals because I'll just be listening to the lyrics. So sometimes I use John Carpenter's Lost Themes. And then other times I just type in scary ambient music on YouTube, and you can get like a loop of like 8 hours of just spooky woodland noises or something. I'll put that on. I usually have the volume really low so I kind of forget I've got music on, but it's still there.
Yeah, so sometimes it's not music, but it's just ambient sounds as well.
Yeah, I find that works really well if I'm not really sure about the tone I'm going for, but I would just like to feel generally creepy.
Some things that sometimes gets overlooked by readers from a work because they wouldn't know is particularly like names of characters or names of places that might have a significance to the author. So they've particularly chosen names of characters or places, but it isn't sort of made clear in the book as to why that is. I wonder if any of the stories in Corpsing you chose characters' names or place names for particular reasons.
Yes, actually. Usually with characters, it's just the first name that comes to mind. I have to be very careful when I'm writing characters because 9 times out of 10 I am picturing someone I know from real life. So, and it won't be them entirely or anything, but like maybe just one aspect of their character. But I sometimes intentionally veer as far away from that real person's name as humanly possible, or I change their gender. Because even though it's only like an aspect of something about a person I find interesting that I want to put into a story, I just would be horrified if someone read a character and thought, well, that's me. And I'm really annoyed, actually. Other than that, Bitey Bachman was basically as a George Romero / Stephen King homage, if you will.
Hence the name Bachman, right? From the Bachman books.
Bachman, yeah. I don't know that people who aren't Stephen King fans would pick up on any of it, but the location is called Flags Ranch. So they're just a couple of there are just a couple of little things in.
Sorry, I don't know. I'm not sure what's the relevance of Flags Ranch.
Well, the ranch has no relevance, but there's a common character in the Stephen King multi-universe called Randall Flagg, or the Man in Black, or he's got a bunch of different names like Richard Farris, but Flagg is just a known name to sort of constant readers, as the Stephen King fans are referred to. Yeah, there are a couple of little details in there. There's a I was going to say inmate, then a patient whose surname is Rice, that was just a little Anne Rice nod, for no particular reason, to be honest, because there's nothing Anne Ricey about this story, but it was just, I think I might have been reading one of the Vampire Chronicles at the time that I wrote this. Yeah, I'm sure there are little details in Bitey Bachman that I've forgotten that I put in there, but that was just yeah, and obviously the zombie things was just like that was just a George Romero, I love George Romero kind of thing. And then 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, so we open and ended this book actually with Stephen King isms. 'Twas the Night Before Christmas is sort of an homage to Pet Sematary, which reviewers did pick up on that because of my last line. Yeah, I did want it to be. I probably went a bit ham-fisted with the references in both of those, but I wanted it to be really clear that I was sort of paying tribute to and not ripping off, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was just picking up the book to have a look, and I'm going to read the last line. So the last line is, "Sometimes a tree is better." Which I'd never noticed the Pet Sematary reference, but yeah.
Got to do it in the accent though.
I don't do accents apart from my own.
You coward! I'm not doing it either, but everyone who has seen the original film knows how he sounds, so they would read the line in that accent. I think, I would hope. Yeah.
So with 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, was the naming of the two boys in there come from somewhere?
Yes, actually. I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying, because I told him this at the time, but I have a writer friend, Nathan Robinson. I named one of the boys Nathan. The boys, the names themselves aren't really very significant, apart from I did just call one of them Nathan because I told him that I'd had an idea for a story based on funny things he'd said about his twin sons. I don't for a second think his twin sons would act like the boys in this story, but it's just that, you know, the sort of twin camaraderie, and I do find sort of, you know, little boys between, I don't know, the age of 7 and 11, they're so funny. Like, kids that are at an age where they just say whatever comes out of their mouth and they don't realize they don't have a social filter yet. You know, thick as thieves, like siblings were thick as thieves and they just get up to things. Like, I don't know, I just find it so funny. Like, kids, they're so funny to me. And Nat posts a lot on social media about his kids, and they seem so like wonderful, like just funny boys. They obviously get on really well, and that was like the inspiration for that story, is just sort of the relationship between the boys. So that was mostly what I wanted to create in that, is just like a real close sort of, you know, nice like close sibling relationship. But yeah, I'm often inspired by writers I know that post about their kids, because writers have got a funny way of talking about things, you know, I guess because they're writers. And it's funny getting little snapshots of people's lives.
And that comes back to the start, doesn't it? Where we talked about um, where you get your inspiration from, and it comes from characters, from people. So you pick up these characters, these people, and then you put them into those situations and create the story.
Yeah, and like it's the great thing about people. People are so interesting, and even if you meet somebody that is sort of boring and sort of blank slate-ish, there's always something you can pick out about a person that you can blow up and draw on, like pull. You can just pull more and more things out of like one little thing. I know someone that lies a lot, and oh my gosh, the things he comes out with, but he doesn't know that anybody knows he's lying, but his lies are so just they're just so ridiculous that they can't be plausible, but he's just been like this for years. And that kind of thing, I can make an entire character out of something like that. I'm sure anybody could. Just things you find funny about people, I guess. I think I find a lot of stuff funny about people that probably isn't funny though, because I've got a real weird love for grumpy middle-aged men who hate their wives. I don't know why, but that's sort of a common character that I write. I myself, I can't remember who said this to me before. He's like, "You're appropriating our culture." um,
Do you use those characters because you can find comedy within the way that they behave?
yeah, because people are people, and everybody has got their own feelings about things. So if someone's grumpy about something and other people perceive them to be just a sort of a grumpy old tosspot, as my mum would probably describe it, but and they think, oh, their wife is a nice person, why is he always so grouchy when he's seen with her? And it's like, you don't know where his home life is. He's probably like, he might have really good reason to always have a frown on his face, and that's where I kind of like to go into and just sort of invent for myself the reason for other people's misery.
It's a good inspiration for a horror author, very much so.
Yeah.
Is there anything else then about the book that we haven't covered that you'd like to discuss or talk about?
I think I don't know about the book itself. It is it's a nice little mix, I think, of funny versus horrible. I think I probably have been a bit hard on myself when I've been talking about it. I'm just very uncomfortable with any sort of self-promotion, and I am very critical of everything. Not just my own work, though. I think well, I hate most things. So I'm hard to impress, even with just my own stuff. I would like to say, if you like a bit of a laugh, and you like you're just a general horror fan, I think that you might like this. So give it a go. Something that I learned. Can I sort of go off on a little bit just about something I learned about the horror community in general because of releasing this?
Yeah, absolutely. Please do.
The earlier on when I said that the indie horror network is a lot smaller than I thought it was. There are a lot of people in it, but like it is sort of a tight little web, I think, where most people know each other. It is the most supportive, lovely group of people in the world, and the fact that horror fans and people who write and make horror have got a weird reputation for being I don't know, sort of like outcast, demented, like morbid people, when actually it's so the opposite. Like everyone was, I'd really released a few short stories, so I was getting to know people a little bit online through anthologies and stuff I was in. But when this came out, I had so many messages, just on Facebook and stuff, from writers I haven't met, but people on, Ginger Nuts of Horror that I write reviews for. I had people on that I write with on there, but we obviously don't meet because we all write from our own homes and stuff. I had messages to, oh, congratulations on your book, can't wait to pick it up. Oh, I read your book, I really liked it. People are so supportive and so nice, and there were people sharing the Amazon link for this that I've never met in real life, that I've barely ever spoken to. And I just found it very overwhelming how welcoming everybody is, and how willing everyone is to promote each other's work and shine a spotlight on it. And so I just really wanted to say that it does feel like having like an extra little family of people. And I'm very, grateful to be a part of it, because I've met some really great people and made some really nice friends because of releasing this book. Well, because I met people through releasing this book. So I don't really know. I don't have an end of the sentence for that, but
I don't think you need one. That's really nice. That's a wonderful sentiment. And
awkwardly trail off.
Awkwardly shuffle out of the room.
I've said what I said. Goodbye.
Kayleigh, thank you very much for taking a trip down memory lane and going all the way back to when you wrote the stories for Corpsing and then when it came out. It's been really interesting to talk to you about your writing methods and some of your crazy inspirations, where they've come from. So thank you ever so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been nerve-wracking and fun.
Corpsing by Kayleigh Marie Edwards is available on paperback and Kindle. The Kindle can be purchased from Amazon. The paperback can be found through most book retailers, including Waterstones, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and directly via the Sinister Horror Company at the website sinisterhorrorcompany.com. Thank you for listening. Being an independent publisher, we are just like you. We share the same passion, the same love for horror fiction. We believe in the incredible work being created, unnoticed by the mainstream. And we want to share it with the world. We are the Sinister Horror Company.